The Scars of Eden, Chapter 2, The Secret Commonwealth. Canberra, Australia, 2020. What company must we be keeping on planet Earth to generate the incredible stories I have been uncovering? What traumas must lie in our ancestral past to have scarred our collective memory with such disturbing mythologies? And how much of what our ancestors have reported bears any relationship to the real world of the 21st century? My burning questions have led me to publishing 2 books which I fully realize put my reputation on the line and lay me open to ridicule. As I bring Escaping from Eden and now The Scars of Eden into the light of public scrutiny, I have to be willing for people to judge, both before and after reading. However, for me, coming from a background of 33 years in ministry, there is another layer of challenge. A pastor should be a reassuring figure, and some consider even the mention of prehistoric ET contact to be an assault on their theology, let alone ET presence today, let alone contact, let alone abductions. Some religious believers respond as if I must be an agent of the devil to raise questions which, on the first glance, appear to be outside the ambit of mainstream religion. So you can probably imagine that it was with some trepidation that I prepared to sit down with my parents-in-law to let them know the topic of my forthcoming book. My wife, Ruth's mom, and dad are devout Christian believers, and their spiritual tradition is Baptist and Pentecostal. I had no idea how they would react to what some would regard as an attack on Orthodox Christianity. On a visit to our place in Canberra one weekend, we sat down together after a Sunday feast of Ghanaian cuisine, and as disarmingly as I could, I laid out my thesis concerning the Bible's narrative of extraterrestrial interventions in our evolution, as well as the stories the Bible shares with other world mythologies concerning a pattern of abduction and hybridization through the ages. My parents-in-law listened quietly and politely. Then, with an animation that completely took me by surprise, they leant forward and said, "Paul, we already know this story. People in Ghana know about this. Our story goes back for generations, and we know people who had this thing that you're talking about happen in their own family." So it was that I came to hear a personal story from my own family that I previously had no idea about. The events it relates are nearly 40 years old. I will now pass the story on to you, but please permit me to leave some details blank for the sake of protecting our friends' privacy. Anloga, Keita District, Volta Region, Ghana, West Africa, October 1984. Dazed and anxious, walking on the beach of Anloga is a young woman. Akua is 26. As she gets her bearings, she begins to make her way back to the family house a few blocks away. When Akua walks through the door, her family is stunned. They gather around her with tears of joy and confusion. She has been missing for 3 years. As they scurry around to make her comfortable and help her to settle, Akua's family cannot help themselves plying her with questions. Where does she go? What happened to her? Why has she not contacted them in all this time? Gradually, sadly, Akua reveals her story. She was taken from the beach in 1981. The place where she was taken was somewhere she didn't know, somewhere hidden and secure, and free of any devices by which she could get messages to the outside world. Her captors held her against her will and forced her to bear children. Exactly how they have returned her to Anloga Beach is something of a mystery to her. Concerning that journey, her mind is a fog. Akua's account is deeply disturbing for her loving mother and father to hear, and their immediate concern is to help her begin to feel safe and secure again in her family home. They do their best to reassure Akua that all is now well, and that they will do everything in their power to help her forget and move on with her life. But as the weeks go by, it becomes clearer that Akua has kept something secret about her abduction. It is a secret that has left a cloud of anxiety perpetually darkening her young face. After long pleading from her mother, Akua finally agrees to tell them what it is that still terrifies her concerning her ordeal. What she has to say is like nothing Akua's mother has ever expected to hear. Between tears, Akua whispers her secret. My captors, she hesitates, were Mamiwata. They were not human. Canberra, Australia, 2019. When Akua returned to her home in Ghana 3 years after her vanishing, her family prepared for the unfolding of a horrible story, a forced marriage, a secret elopement, kidnapping, or slavery. Such things are hardly unknown. However, the account their daughter brought them was far and away from anything they had expected. Yet when Akua spoke the words, Mamiwata, they knew what she was talking about. For centuries, Ghanaians had told stories of Mamiwata abductions. The history of this narrative is so ancient that its roots have become lost in the mist of time. On my own account, before that Sunday lunch with my parents-in-law, I had known nothing of the Mamiwata tradition. As I sat and listened to the ancestral wisdom of my own family, I learned that accounts of Mamiwata are not necessarily stories of ET contact. The Mamiwata people are generally identified as highly intelligent, extraordinarily beautiful, and humanoid in form. They are often very compelling, with promises of advancing the intelligence, health, and prosperity of those they take, and they operate, so the tradition goes, out of underwater bases. This was a story like nothing I had heard before. My Ghanaian family are Pentecostals, Catholics, and Methodists. I had not realized how close I was to another, more indigenous tradition. In some places, Mamiwata has morphed into a kind of religious or spiritual practice, not unlike the local rituals of appeasing the territorial spirits which can be found in other places. The religious version of the story sees Mamiwata as a female entity with power over the seas, not necessarily malevolent, but so superior in power that you would never want to get on the wrong side of her. Mamiwata is a tradition of abduction narratives which stretches back in history for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. The Mamiwata reports relate more often to males being taken from near the beach, though abductions of females such as Akua are a part of the narrative too. The purpose of these abductions, so the tradition tells us, is a program of hybridization. For some reason, so the mythology goes, the Mamiwata people wanted to create a new lineage of Mamiwata people modified with human DNA. I realize I have taken us quickly into the deep end. Without a doubt, abduction and hybridization probably constitute the hardest to swallow of all aspects of ancient ET claims. Yet in the panoply of world mythology and ancestral memory, they are possibly the most widely recurring themes. My earliest awareness of ancient hybridization narratives came from the Bible. It appears in the pages of Genesis 6, when the B'nai Elohim, ones like the powerful ones, came down to planet Earth to take human females. Their interbreeding produced a lineage called the Nephilim, who were the giants of legend. Both the author of Genesis 6 in the Hebrew canon and the author of the letter of Jude in the New Testament assume that their readers are familiar with this piece of history as told in another famous text, the Book of Enoch, a text to be found today in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon of the Bible. The Book of Enoch describes the abductions referenced in Genesis 6 in even greater detail. It names those doing the abducting as watchers and describes how they had transgressed fundamental ethics governing relationships with the human race, arriving from somewhere among the stars to begin their program of producing hybrid offspring. Josephus, the Jewish historian of the 1st century CE, appeals to this scriptural episode to explain the presence of giant human beings through the annals of history and at the time of his writing. Josephus understood the Jewish tradition to be only one iteration of this legend of human hybridization with advanced beings. Furthermore, he identifies the ancient Greek legends as vehicles of the same memory. The Greek name for these hybrids was Titans. The Greek legends and the Hebrew mythologies are not the same, but both report external interventions in our evolution as a species. Both outline a program of hybridization which was not only traumatic for our ancestors, but which deeply divided the community of superior beings associated with Project Earth at that time. These strange notes sound again in ancient Indian, Norse, and Celtic narratives. Ancient Egyptian and Native American traditions also hint at something similar. The name Mami Water for the ancient Ghanaian version of the story is a new name. It dates from the British occupation of the Gold Coast, which shortly after its liberation in 1950 took the African name of Ghana. However, by other names, the Mami Water tradition is far older and wider. Reports of Mami Water abductions are told from Kenya on Africa's east coast down to the southernmost tip of South Africa, all along Africa's western seaboard and into the Caribbean, Haiti, Brazil, and Cuba. Curious parallels can be found in stories from Alaska and the Philippines. For instance, the Luo people of Kenya have curated the story of Nyamgadho Wuadambare. It tells of a man, Nyamgadhu, and it tells of quite a lot about him. Nyamgadho was a Bantu man of the Waturi tribe who lived in the 14th and 15th century in the village of Nyandiwa in the Suba district of Kenya on the shores of Namlowi, Lake Victoria. One morning, so the story goes, he found a strange-looking woman caught up in one of his fish nets. The fisherman agrees to marry the woman and live with her because she persuades him that she can bring him unimagined wisdom and prosperity, which she does. But she gives Nyamgadhu a condition, that he must never speak of her true place of origin in the water. Some familiar notes are sounding. In Kenya, Mami Water are identified with the Jinni, the Swahili equivalent of the jinn of the Arabic peoples. Like the Mami Water tradition, the Maharani tradition is for some a ghost-like spiritual phenomenon, while for others a more concrete story is told. A story in which a Kenyan man or woman encounters a strange person who is tall, white, and unbelievably beautiful. These tall white visitors, the Maharani, appear to individuals by teleportation. Their visits begin in the contactee's childhood and continue into adulthood. On later visits, the Maharani take their contactees to bases underneath the waters of the Indian Ocean. Here the contactees are used to produce hybrid children, who from time to time they are allowed to see. However, the children are kept by the Maharani who, after each abduction episode, return their contactees to their earthly homes, unharmed and often healthier than when they left. The families and religious communities of Kenyans who report these experiences are often confused and upset when their loved ones return, speaking affectionately of their beautiful, tall, white captors. Indeed, in Kenya, such testimonies are often regarded as evidence of mental illness or demonization. This kind of dissonance reminds us that these kinds of abduction narratives are part of a tradition that stands separate from and previous to the official mainstream religions. The abduction traditions of Kenya find their source neither in Christianity nor in Islam. They exist within the unofficial, indigenous knowledge of the people, carried orally and puzzled over from one generation to the next. Elements of the Mami Water or Maharani folklore repeat in the indigenous Filipino story of the Encantos. The Encantos are shape-shifting entities associated with the water. Their humanoid appearance is almost identical to our own. They could almost pass for regular Filipinos, save for their unusual skin color and the lack of a philtrum on the upper lip. The Encantos are known for abducting human beings who get too close. The Filipino word Diwatas is another word that invokes ancestral knowledge of non-human entities who abduct human beings. The Diwatas, so the tradition goes, like to maintain a covert presence and don't take too kindly to their cover being blown. For that reason, people often refer to these entities obliquely in whispered conversations as Dili Inga Nato, which means those unlike us, or Lamandagat, which means those who dwell under the sea. These strange Dewatas are physical beings, similar enough to humans to be able to procreate with those they take in order to create hybrid people. Does any of this sound familiar? The very fact that such specialized language has been developed to carry the story reveals how important it has been to memorialize this information, both in Filipino culture and beyond. The word Dewata suggests that the Filipino version of the story may have originated in India. This is because Dewatas is derived from an ancient Sanskrit word, Devata, which means a god or superior being. In a similar vein, the Vodou tradition of Haiti speaks of Simbinandlo, the spirit of the water. African slaves brought the tradition to the Caribbean with the name Yamoja. Some of the words that belong to these traditions are incredibly intriguing. They have associations with spirits and serpents, and just like the word Elohim in the Hebrew stories, they can often be translated to mean either a god or a demon. This 180-degree ambiguity is another reminder that we are dealing with ancient stories, stories that long predate the familiar binaries of good and bad, light and dark, that came with later importations of organized religion. With these ancient abduction stories, we are really in at the deep end. Now, some might want to suggest that I am taking these stories too literally. Might these ancestral stories be carrying the memory not of alien species, but of foreigners? Could these mythologies and abductions be metaphors for the experience of the slave trade? The coastal homes of the mythologies in question would all have experienced a measure of slave trafficking. For me, this explanation holds little water. The patterns that repeat in the stories, like those of the Mamiwata, Maharani, Yamoja, Jinni, Jinn, Encantos, Dewatas, Dili Nganato, and Lamandagat, are of young people being taken from near the water, held for only a short time in an underwater base, and then returned unharmed, but having been exploited for their hybridization. Suffice it to say, those are not the patterns of human slavery. It is a different pattern. As I researched these indigenous mythologies and began joining the dots from continent to continent, I found more and more cultures offering similar narratives. To my surprise, I soon learned that the same phenomena of abduction and hybridization, along with specialized language for it, exist with European narrative traditions. In the 19th century, folklorist Edwin Hartland argued that behind the fae and fairy traditions of Europe's Celtic peoples lay a real-world phenomenon. With great courage, he put forward the view that there is in Celtic folklore the memorialization of a flesh and blood program of hybridization between human beings and another human-like presence occupying planet Earth, going back hundreds and maybe even thousands of years. 2 centuries before, Reverend Robert Kirk published his own research into the indigenous narratives of the Scottish Highlands. His book is still in print. The picture he pieced together described a covert layer of non-human interference or even governance over human affairs, which he referred to as the Secret Commonwealth. It was a shocking conclusion for people to hear from a Scottish Presbyterian minister. The Irish iteration reinforces the notion that this other presence wishes to keep itself secret. It echoes the curious detail from the Filipino tradition of not naming these other entities directly, referring to them instead with epithets such as those who dwell under the water and those unlike us. The whispered Irish epithets are the good people, or the noble people, or the other crowd. A Welsh telling can be found within the accounts of the Tylwyth Teg. Though often taken as fairy tale of the fictional kind, some familiar notes resound. The eminent American anthropologist Walter Yealing Evans Wentz noted an unusual story within the Tylwyth Teg canon, which described the existence of human-like beings who had the appearance of beautiful young women. They would meet young men near the water's edge and then entice them to follow them into their underwater communities to live with them as their husbands. Should any of the husbands choose to leave, they would have to return alone. Within the Irish canon, we can find stories of abduction for hybridization, which would be indistinguishable from the testimony of 21st century claimants of abduction or close encounters with extraterrestrial beings, right down to the shape of the craft, the shape of the alien beings' faces, and their speechless mode of communication. All that differs is the vocabulary used. Absent of terms such as extraterrestrial, alien, small gray, or interdimensional, Irish stories tell the tale of fairies and little people. So perhaps reporter Richard Carlton's reference to being off with the pixies was not so wide of the mark after all, even if it was not meant kindly. As I reflect on the geographical spread of these narratives, my mind goes back to the first time I heard a story of abduction and hybridization. It was far away from Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, far away from Africa and the Caribbean, in a place whose legends have inspired and fascinated people for thousands of years. Gnosis on the island of Crete, July 1985. It is the era of terrorism. Around the world, bombings and hijackings are regularly punctuating the international conflicts of the day. My dad's work is in combating the impact of these troubles on our ability to travel the world. It is as a thank you for his work that our family is in Greece this summer, exploring the unique treasures that this beautiful country has to offer. We are touring the Greek islands as the guest of the Greek shipping magnate Andreas Potomianos. And the amazing world of antiquity is a revelation for me. Crete is a beautiful island, and Gnosis is its most significant megalithic site, dating from the Bronze Age. It is an inspiring feeling to stand in the place of an ancient civilization. In its heyday, Gnosis was home to the Minoan people. Their culture thrived here between 3000 and 1000 BCE. The Minoans were an advanced maritime culture whose cities were impressive multi-story environments with exquisite architecture, plumbing, and airflow management. Their advancement in technology catches my attention, so I put a question to our guide. Who exactly were the Minoans that they were so advanced? Where exactly did they come from? The answer comes in the form of a story I've never heard before. The Minoan culture appeared 5,000 years ago, the guide begins. They were the people of the great ruler Minos. Minos was a powerful man, although not really a man. He was a hybrid. The mother of Minos was a very beautiful woman. She was a daughter of Agenor, a king of the Phoenicians. One day she was walking on the beach with her young friends. Her beauty drew the attention of the ruler of the gods, whose name was Zeus. He instantly decided that he must have her. Then, as if from nowhere, a beautiful and gentle bull appears on the beach beside her. The bull captivates the young woman with his animal beauty and gentle spirit. She strokes the animal and pets it. Something compels her to climb onto its back, whereupon the bull gallops into the waves, taking her far from her home and family in Phoenicia, all the way here to the island of Crete. It is here, on this very island, that the young girl discovers that her captor is not a bull, but a handsome god. You know what they say about Greek gods. They are very, very good looking. Zeus seduces the young woman, and when the time comes, she produces 3 sons, Rhadamanthus, Sarpedon, and Minos. Minos became the ruler of the Minoan culture. His mother's name was Europa. The entire continent of Europe is named after her. I had never heard this story before. So she was abducted? Yes, exactly. Europa was abducted by a handsome Greek god. And what happened next? Europa was an unmarried mother with 3 children, which could have been difficult. But fortunately for her, she was a very beautiful woman. She knew the king of Crete, and he loved her so much that he married her and was willing to adopt her 3 sons as his own. And so they all lived a happy life. All except for Europa's first lover, Zeus, who was killed in a battle. I was open-mouthed. This was something I had never learned in school. The whole of Europe is named after an abductee, a young lady who was taken from the beach. I had always thought that Zeus was an ancient Greek almighty god. This legend paints a different picture. Zeus is flesh and blood, something similar enough to a human being to hybridize with a human. Yes, he is powerful. He is able to manipulate the consciousness of Europa so as to cloak his true appearance. But he is not all-powerful. He is not even immortal. In the end, someone kills him in a battle. This, most famous of the gods, according to this version of events, was an advanced being who used his superior power to abduct and hybridize. The very name of Europe embodies a story of prehistoric hybridization. My time in Greece has sown a seed of curiosity that will grow for many years to come. On our final evening in Athens, we settle into our cabins on our ship, the World Renaissance, then the flagship of the Epirotiki cruise line. It is as we change into more formal attire for dinner that I notice something odd. Standing bare-chested in front of the bathroom mirror, I see something that does not belong. 3 raised lines on my belly, just below and to one side of the navel. The lines are about 8 centimeters long, with a pinprick effect that looks uncannily like a scar of a multiple vaccination. What is it? I haven't had an inoculation in my belly. It's hardly something I would forget. Being a mere 20 years old, I take myself into the next cabin for my mom to provide a more expert diagnosis. It's probably just some kind of rash, she says offhandedly, but it does not look like a rash to me. I don't know what it is. And how long has it been there? Whatever it is, I put my mind on other things and forget about it. Indeed, it will be many years before I even remember the thing that happened in 1985. Today, I wonder more than ever how a testimony so widespread, carried by so many diverse cultures and traditions, could remain so unknown. In the West of the 21st century, when people like our friend Akua in Ghana claim to have experienced an abduction at the hands of something non-human, we startle as if we have never heard the like. As I journey through Greece, South Africa, Ghana to Kenya, Cuba, Brazil, the Caribbean, the Philippines, India, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, it is becoming clear to me that the like has in fact been told to us since time immemorial. We just haven't taken it seriously. Western culture today appears unable to take these kinds of reports seriously. What we now call close encounters of the fourth kind must be categorized as fable or fiction, metaphor or madness. The one thing we will not do with a person claiming a flesh and blood abduction experience is listen with respect. At least that is what I thought. Then one day in 2018, the revered journalist and national icon Ida Boutros, chair of Australia's ABC, spoke some words on national television that made my jaw drop. And that is the end of chapter 2. Peace and blessings to you all.